Hello, my name is Rachel Duke, and I'm 61 years old. I'm the assistant principal at this school.
How old were you when the 9/11 attacks happened?
I was 45 years old. Seems like just yesterday in one way, and another way it seems like a long time ago.
Where were you when the attacks occurred?
I was a teacher in middle school at Washington Alternative School, teaching social studies and English.
Okay, how did you find out about the first attack?
A teacher down the hall had heard the news and had us stop by her room, and she had it on the television. We were watching the news report.
And how did you react?
I couldn't believe it. We watched it from the beginning, and I kept hoping that everybody was out of the building, but I knew they weren't, and I was just totally in disbelief.
And the second attack?
We saw it as it actually happened live, and then we knew, at that point, we knew we were under attack. The first one we thought maybe an accident, the plane running into the building, like flying into the building, but the second one we knew it was a deliberate attack.
Okay. And how did you find out about the attack on the Pentagon?
We watched it live the rest of the day. Everybody was in shock, and we had older students, and there was no teaching that was going to take place that day. We were all watching, so we saw it all happen and heard the play-by-play from the news media.
Was there a lot of chaos, or?
Not chaos in our building, but chaos in our head. And we wondered how we would all be affected by this, how our school would be affected, how our country would be affected, our family and friends, how they would be affected, how the military would be affected. We were a lot of chaos in our heads.
Did you have any family near the area?
I didn't have anybody near the area, but I had a very close cousin and her husband that were traveling, and they had been to Canada, and I wasn't sure where they were. They were traveling in a camper, so I didn't know where they were, but I wanted them to come home.
Right. Did you have any family in the military during the attacks?
No, I didn't.
Were you scared for any of your friends or family that were around you?
I was scared for our country. I had never been through anything like this before, and I guess I thought our country would never. Hello, my name is Rachel Duke, and I'm 61 years old. I'm the assistant principal at this school.
How old were you when the 9/11 attacks happened?
I was 45 years old. Seems like just yesterday in one way, and another way it seems like a long time ago.
Where were you when the attacks occurred?
I was a teacher in middle school at Washington Alternative School, teaching social studies and English.
Okay, how did you find out about the first attack?
A teacher down the hall had heard the news and had us stop by her room, and she had it on the television. We were watching the news report.
And how did you react?
I couldn't believe it. We watched it from the beginning, and I kept hoping that everybody was out of the building, but I knew they weren't, and I was just totally in disbelief.
And the second attack?
We saw it as it actually happened live, and then we knew, at that point, we knew we were under attack. The first one we thought maybe an accident, the plane running into the building, like flying into the building, but the second one we knew it was a deliberate attack.
Okay. And how did you find out about the attack on the Pentagon?
We watched it live the rest of the day. Everybody was in shock, and we had older students, and there was no teaching that was going to take place that day. We were all watching, so we saw it all happen and heard the play-by-play from the news media.
Was there a lot of chaos, or?
Not chaos in our building, but chaos in our head. And we wondered how we would all be affected by this, how our school would be affected, how our country would be affected, our family and friends, how they would be affected, how the military would be affected. We were a a lot of chaos in our heads.
Did you have any family near the area?
I didn't have anybody near the area, but I had a very close cousin and her husband that were traveling, and they had been to Canada, and I wasn't sure where they were. They were traveling in a camper, so I didn't know where they were, but I wanted them to come home.
Right. Did you have any family in the military during the attacks?
No, I didn't.
Were you scared for any of your friends or family that were around you?
I was scared for our country. I had never been through anything like this before, and I guess I thought our country would never be attacked on our soil. I never even thought that would ever happen. We had been fighting wars on other soils, but not here since Pearl Harbor. So I never thought that would ever happen, and so I was scared for our country and scared for the people. They shut down all airlines. I was scared for people who were stranded places. How would they get home? There were no flights allowed to happen. That's unheard of. I'd never had anything like that happen in my lifetime. So for them to ground all airplanes and aircrafts, that was huge. And so I didn't know where everybody, who would be stranded and how I was thinking about people trying to get home from work where they were flying back somewhere and what was going to happen. It was just a very troubling time.
Right. Did you agree with the government to send troops to Afghanistan and Iraq?
Yes.
Why did you feel that way?
I grew up with my dad was in World War II. And I remember him saying he was in high school when Pearl Harbor was attacked. And I remember him telling us that he quit high school to go fight in World War II because he and his friends were afraid the war would be over before they had a chance to fight, because they would not allow our soil to be attacked. And when the attack happened at Pearl Harbor, it infuriated everybody, and everybody was more patriotic than ever to protect our country. So I'd rather fight the war in other places than here. But it's their soil, it's the soil of other countries, but I want the terrorists and I want all of that to be stopped on the soil before it gets here.
Okay. How did you feel about the NSA, the National Security Agency?
I know that they've made some mistakes, but it had to happen. We had to have tighter security, and there have been events that's happened where if it wasn't for that security happening in our airport, another bomb would have destroyed another plane or killed more people. So as much as I hate to go through all that security when I fly, and I don't like it, and I feel like it's an invasion of privacy, and there's nothing I like about it, I think it's absolutely necessary.
Okay. Well, I think that concludes it. Thank you very much, Ms. Duke.
All right. You think you got at least 10 minutes?
No, I got 3 minutes.
My name is Rachel Duke, and I'm 61 years old.
How old were you when the 9/11 attack happened?
I was 45 years old. Seems like a long time ago in one way, and then another way it seems like it just happened a few days ago.
Where were you when the attack happened?
I think everybody remembers where they were. I was at Washington Alternative School here in Hamilton County. I remember when I got the news. I remember how everybody felt, the look in everybody's eyes, the fear that came over us. But I was working that day, and I was working with the middle school students, teaching social studies and English.
How did you find out about the first attack?
I was walking down the hall, and one of our teachers had a phone call from a friend that said turn the TV on. So she had turned it on and was watching it, and as I walked by the hall, she called me into her room and said, "Miss Duke, you've got to see this." And at first I didn't think it was something happening in the news. I just thought it was something that she wanted me to see, and so I went in and the TV was on, and I thought at first it wasn't real. But the more I stood there and I said, I think I even said, "Is this real? Is this happening now?" And she just shook her head. She couldn't hardly talk. She just shook her head yes. And so that's how I first found out.
How did people around you react?
We were all just very quiet. Some of our students became more and more scared as the day went on, because at that point everyone was just watching it in every classroom, and we had middle school and high school students, and everyone was just in their rooms sitting there watching it without saying anything. And we're trying to figure out not only what's happening, but how this will affect us and what we need to do if we need to do something. Teachers are always thinking, protect the children, so we're trying to figure out if there's something we need to do. Or, of course, it seems New York was so far away, but we didn't know if our country was being attacked, what was going to happen. So a lot of uncertainty, some fear. Students were and I'm sure all of us were fearful also. We just couldn't express it like our students could. There were some girls crying, and it was just, and people wanting to call home. So it was just very uncertain, very scary times.
So did the school that you worked at, did they come up with a procedure for if it happened in any area surrounding you?
Not at that time, but later on, after that event, there were procedures in place and trainings that took place with teachers for schools that had actual showers in their buildings, and so it was like it had, we were making preparedness efforts for what might happen later on, and if it happened in our city, where our students and where we could take our students, where there would be a place where they could showers in the buildings. They identified every large building that had showers. That seemed to be a very important thing, because I think all schools had refrigerated areas, for food, and there were some things that all schools had, but showers were something that were not in every school. And I think they even identified churches and civic buildings, and every county had to have areas where large numbers of people could go if there were to be some kind of catastrophe similar to that, where large groups of people needed to stay over a long period of time. So that happened after that. That day, we were just all in shock of the events. But within the next few months, those kinds of things started happening, and people started coming to our schools. Our school did have a shower area. So our school was one that would have been used for people who needed a place to stay in case of a crisis. So we were trained, and people did come and speak with us about what would happen, that they would ask teachers to remain in the building to help with the people that were coming and not to try to get home, that kind of thing. It kind of reminded me, I was in the 3rd grade during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then we had to practice carrying our blanket. We all had to have a blanket at school, and I had an old scratchy wool army blanket that my mother let me take to school because she didn't think I'd ever need it. But we had to practice carrying that blanket to the church a block away and go down in the basement and sit there with our blanket to practice that drill in case there was the missile attack occurred. So it kind of reminded me of that. We're thinking about preparedness, not where children need to bring a blanket to school and practice walking somewhere to get into a basement. But it reminded me of that same feeling of we need to be prepared for more than just, we need to have more drills other than just fire drills and tornado drills. Well, lockdown drills came when I was an adult. That was a new kind of drill. It's sort of like society is reflected is reflected through the kind of drills we have to have at school, and the kind of preparedness we have to have at school reflects what's going on in society. So it kind of gave me that same feeling.
Okay. How did you feel when Flight 97 went down?
Just shock. And at first I thought maybe it was just an accident, some kind of malfunction of the plane, or the pilot died or passed out or something. I'm not thinking it's an attack, or I'm hoping that it's not, that it's just a horrible, horrible accident. And so it just it's like the breath left your body. It's like it was such a shock that you couldn't think of anything but what was happening in that moment. You couldn't think of the future or the past. You were just blank inside, and all you could do was just watch what was happening and pray that everybody got out okay, but you knew it didn't happen that way. And to see it on television where the plane actually hitting the building, it was like out of a science fiction movie. It couldn't be real, but it was.
How were other people's reactions when the flight was down? Was it the same, or?
We, like I said, teachers couldn't show fear. We tried not to show too much fear, but they could see the look in our face that we were in shock. I remember our custodian, Mr. Gilbert. He was a very elderly gentleman and a pastor of a nearby church. And there were two middle school teachers there at the time, me and my close friend, middle school teacher across the hall that taught math and science. And I remember him coming down the hall, and Miss Taylor and I out in the hall just distraught over the turn of events and speaking about what's happening. And him just saying, well, let's just pray. And we all just gathered together in the hall, the three of us, and he prayed for us, and he prayed for the other students, and he prayed for the families affected and the people affected by this tragedy, and the military and our country and our leaders. He just prayed in the hall right there that minute for everybody in the building and in the country. And it brought us comfort that he led us in that prayer during that time. It was very comforting.
How did you feel when the second tower fell?
Then I knew in my head and in my heart it was an attack. There couldn't be two accidents like that. I remember asking somebody, did everybody get out of the second building? In my mind I was thinking, maybe since the first attack had happened so close to the other twin tower, that maybe they had evacuated that building, because some time had passed. I don't remember how much time had passed, but some time had passed between the two attacks, and I thought maybe they had evacuated that building, and even not only that building, but surrounding buildings, and had got the people away. But then sometime later, probably minutes, maybe an hour, I knew that that building had not been evacuated, and that even there were a lot of firefighters and police officers and people that had gone into the building to try to get people out of the first building, and now they're trying to get them out of the second building, and a lot of them are losing their life at that minute. I think that was just so profound to know. While I'm watching this on television, a lot of people are dying right then. A lot of people are trying to get out, and not only could we not get to them here, but even there, if the professionals there weren't able to get to them, it was like if the only way they were going to survive if they could find a way, if they weren't injured so bad that they can actually get down those stairs and get out of the building. And of course, it was on video of people actually jumping out of the windows, and it was horrible even to watch it. People had no hope, but they had to get out of the fire, so they jumped out of windows and fell to their death. Many people did that, and so it was just, at that point I knew we were under attack, and so that started changing my thinking. If New York's under attack, we're under attack as a country, and who else is going to be under attack? So my thoughts started changing and deepening, and the worry just kept coming like a wave over and over and over. Like, what do we do now? What is my reaction? What do I need to do? I know that I got a call from home saying that the gas station, people were lined up at gas stations trying to get gas, and that if you have a full tank, you need to, go down the street and fill up your tank quickly, because there was fear that we were going to run out of things. And that may have come from people who had lived here in World War II, and they knew that that things, you couldn't get things as easily as you could. When the war was going on, things happened quickly, and things would be scarce. Some things were more scarce than others, and so I think people panicked and thought, oh, we need to stock up. We need to get gas. We need to make sure we're ready to get out of here if I have to get out of here or get my family out of here. So a lot of panic in that way, and a lot of trying to gather things up to make sure you're prepared for whatever may happen. We didn't know if schools would be called off. By the end of the day, our superintendent sent a letter to all the schools and everybody in the schools, and for students to take home to their parents, saying that what a terrible turn of events had taken place, but at this point, school will continue as normal unless otherwise, unless they receive other notification. And so even our superintendent was trying to decide what he needed to do, and a letter to parents was his response to let them know we are going to continue school as normal, because the bottom line that we thought our best wisdom at the end of this day was for the children's sake, especially the younger children, because some of the younger children, I understood, at elementary schools were watching it, and they were very scared. So at the end of the day, our best wisdom was to let's go on as normal as much as possible, because that's what you try to do with younger children. You try to let them see we're going to move on. Life will continue. This is a horrible event that took place, but we will continue as normal to make them feel not as much fear. So that was the plan, basically, at that point. And the letter went home to parents. I still have that letter somewhere from the superintendent. And so I remember that that's the best we knew to do on that day.
Did you agree with the superintendent, or did you feel like maybe they should have had a couple of days for their parents to cope with all of the events? They could have lost their kids that day unknowingly, and I feel like maybe their parents should have had some time with them. So do you agree?
Some of the parents did keep their children home for days, but not so much at our school. Our school, like I said, they were older students. But I knew it was reported that parents kept their children home just because they wanted to feel them close and know that everything was okay, and they wanted to help their young children that knew what was happening, help them cope with things. They knew if they went to school, they weren't going to be able to think about it. So, but I agree that the best thing to do in a situation like that, unless you're under imminent danger, and there was no imminent danger that we knew of for our part of the country, not that we knew of, but that to try to go on as normal, try to show them that terrible things happen, but life goes on, and we move on, and we push through it, and we help each other through it, and being in groups of people was helpful. To be alone during that time would have been awful, but to be with other people so you could talk it out and console each other and pray with each other, that was an important thing to do. So I agree that it needed to happen the way it did.
Well, there were a lot of support groups for those in the morning.
Yes, I know the guidance counselors at the school were available. Of course, they all had to stay at their own school. Sometimes when an event happens, the guidance counselors will go to one school or another. In this case, every school was feeling all of this, and so the guidance counselors did step up, and everybody did. Everybody stepped up to try to make sure that everybody felt as safe as we could possibly make them feel during this terrible time, and that we were all in this together, and it was us as a country, and we were all hurting together. Now, in the aftermath, schools began collecting things and sending notes and an outpouring of love from every school here in Hamilton County and in the nation, an outpouring of love from children, sending notes to the families, and just to show that we're hurting as much as we can with you, even though you're going through all of these horrible things. But an outpouring of love came from everybody. Put flags outside their house to show we are Americans and we're proud to be Americans. It was just when tragedy happens, Americans come together. We may argue and bicker about a lot of things, but when tragedy happens and you hurt our country, we stick together. We're just known for that, and patriotism rises to the top. Everybody was wanting to pledge, and every pledge allegiance. There was none of that disrespect that goes on sometimes in peaceful times. Everybody wanted to know that we're the country, we're strong together, and for our firefighters and officers, police officers that lost their lives, paramedics and things that lost their lives, there was an outpouring to them and their families as them being heroes, and they were heroes.
How did you learn about the attack on the Pentagon?
Same way. From the news at that point, every news channel was only reporting this. Every news channel was on live. And I heard about, and I knew the plane, I knew that the Pentagon, and at that point it only confirmed our belief that our country was under attack. And every time there was another plane crash, we knew, where else is a plane going to crash? Where else is it in a place where they think it's important enough to try to destroy? And so everybody's thinking, well, what do we live close to that they may want to destroy? So it was just more and more fear that our country is under a terrible attack.
So did you have any family in the military at the time?
No, I didn't. I had a couple of my cousins that were traveling, and they had been to Canada, and I wasn't sure where they were at the time, and I didn't know if they were where they were, but they were actually in California at that time. But I just remember wanting them to come home. I wanted everybody just to be home and close, and us us get through this together.
Did you have any family or friends living near the attacks?
No, I didn't. No, there were some of our students that had family and friends there, and they were very distraught. And of course, they couldn't contact them for a period of time. They didn't know if they were okay or not. But some of our students did have family, and some of them had people in the military that they were concerned about too. And so we tried to console them. But there were days that passed before they knew if their friends and family were okay or not. Days that passed. So it was a very uncertain, scary time. I didn't have to go through that, but I saw what people were going through that were in that position where they were worried about people who were really there and whether they survived or not.
So you think that the students who had friends and family members there, you think they were scared for them?
They were very scared. I'm sure they couldn't think of anything but that until they knew for sure that they were safe. And to my knowledge, I didn't know anybody that actually had someone that died from that event that was in our school, but there were some scary times until they knew their family and friends were safe.
Do you agree with the government to send troops to Afghanistan and Iraq?
Yes, I grew up with a dad who was in World War II, and he joined the Navy when he was a senior in high school. He quit high school, as most of the boys in high school did then, to fight in World War II because Pearl Harbor had been bombed. And this 9/11 was very much like that Pearl Harbor attack, only in Pearl Harbor it was mainly military base, but still civilians lost their lives. This was an attack on civilians at 9/11, just pure civilians. And so, but that same feel was there, that we need to fight this fight on other soils. We need to stop them from coming to hurt our country instead of and fight there instead of here. And I believe that's the way our military, military people that I know feel that way. They'd rather fight the battle on the perpetrator's soil and not our soil.
How did you feel about the NSA, the National Security Agency?
Well, I know I don't think they're doing everything right, but it had to happen. We had to have some regulations. That day they stopped all flights. All planes had to land because they didn't know which other ones had terrorists on them that were going to try to crash somewhere else. And so all flights had to be stopped. So when they did start it up again, they didn't know who may be getting on a plane with a bomb. They didn't know who had weapons. And so they had to have some tight security, and I agree that it had to happen. And I don't like it when I fly, and I've flown quite a few times since then. I don't like how it makes you feel. You feel like you're being targeted sometimes, or you feel like it's that just walking through the door the doorways there that would alarm if you had any metals on you, that's enough, but it really isn't enough. And so, as bad as it makes me feel, and that my privacy has been invaded when they do the things they do, even randomly stopping people, make them take their shoes off. I understood why it was important. Making you throw away things, tubes of things that were in your suitcase that you knew was just makeup or lotion, but they don't know what's in the tube, so you have to throw it away. I didn't like those things like everybody else, but I knew it was absolutely necessary. And until we could come up with ways to make it foolproof that people are safe on planes, that I agree they had to do something as much as they knew to do at the time, even though there were people that did it inappropriately sometimes, but something had to be done for security so people could fly.
So you do agree with increased airport security?
I agree with it. I want it to get better. I want us to have more technology that can find things without invading the privacy, but and we have to do what we can do to make people safe.
Okay.
There's one other thing. I visited New York after 9/11, before the monument was up. I visited there when all they had were the lights going straight up where the buildings were. And I had never been to New York before. That was my first time. And New York's really different anyway. There, you ride in subways everywhere you go. Children go to school in subways. They don't. Buildings are all built straight up, and very little. A lot of cabs and stuff. But people walk just about where they go. And a parking space costs more than a house does there in many situations, or an apartment. So it was really different. But we actually got on a bus and went to look at the spot where 9/11 took place. And the people there just don't want to talk about it. It was almost like they didn't want you to go look at it. It was like a hurting place for them so badly that it hurt them even more for tourists to come and look at it. So it was a very reverent place. And I know that's been many, many years ago that I was there, but just the lights being so quiet and just showing at night where the Twin Towers stood was about all the people there could take. So I'm sure it's much different now, but the wound was so fresh when I was there just a few years later that I was very much aware of how the New Yorkers felt about people going to stare at that place or look at it. Even if we were being reverent, which we were, it was like they hurt so bad they didn't want anybody looking at it. So I thought that was an interesting take, even years after that. And I'm sure it's different now, but still I think people there are very, very reverent of that spot where so many people died.
Did you feel like maybe they thought it was an insult?
Some probably did.
It was the constant reminder of what had happened? I
think so. I think some did. Now, as long as you were showing reverence, I think they appreciated that part. Nobody's partying and reveling around the place. It wasn't that. But for tourist bus after tourist bus to pass by was hard for them. But we're strong. Americans are strong, and time will help. And that's what's happened now. Time's helped, and now we've got to make sure we've learned from that, and that we have things in place to make sure it doesn't ever happen again.